When I was 16 years old, I wrote in my journal, "There is no realization so empowering and intimidating as that you're solely responsible for the reality in which you find yourself." And I memorized it years later when I found it because I realized I was right. But I didn't know it at the time. And I wanted to take the next, well, I guess 20 years now and prove that to myself. And I have. And so now I'm coming back to myself with this theory that we build our lives around ourselves based on a subconscious self-image of what we believe we deserve. And I can definitively say, yes, that is the case. And I've shown it to myself, I've experienced it in all different kinds of ways, but now I know that I was onto something. And so that's been really inspiring to kind of see that play out in my own life. I own 2 businesses, a waffle company and a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu gym. This is just so you know like who I am and why I'm here. I do personal training every morning for 2 to 4 hours. I have a master's degree in organizational leadership, and I will hopefully in the next couple months be a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which has taken me 12 years. I've lived in 4 countries. I was an undefeated cage fighter, and I have 2 kids, so that's kind of who I am. That's been a long time coming, but bringing all of that crazy, like I'm a veteran, I was injured in airborne school, like all that crazy, stupid, like wild life experience and kind of channeling that into giving back and trying to help other people understand. Because I work with a lot of people as a personal trainer and with a lot of my students and people that I mentor. I work with a lot of people who have really interesting stories, and a lot of times they have a lot of trauma. So a huge part of my journey has been how to be present to people for that and how to kind of move them forward in that. The first thing I want to do with you today is go through that one more time, the reality architecture piece, which is we're all in a perpetual state of creating a life around ourselves that corresponds to a subconscious self-image of what we believe we deserve. This is not an accident. The clothes you wear, the family you've created, your pets, your look, your weight, your relationships, your finances, none of that is an accident. That is based on what you believe, and all of the choices that you make, minute to minute, day to day, created that life for you. Part of that is extreme ownership. The idea that this is not happening to you, this is being created by you. It's a classic reframe of the internal versus external locus of control in psychology, where some people believe that their life is happening to them. They see themselves as a victim of circumstance or whatever. And other people believe that they are the arbiter of their existence, that they're out there building their reality through their choices. You have a bad day. Some people say this bad day happened to me. If I have a bad day, I go, I chose to have a bad day. And that's the difference. Classic internal versus external. So in a way, it's kind of a reframe of that. I'm going to ask you guys to do a couple different exercises today where you write down on a piece of paper. So if everybody could find a piece of paper really quick. The second thing about that, and this is super important, this is not going to be shared with anybody. So the questions I'm going to ask you today and the answers to those questions and subsequent questions are just for you. So don't think you're going to have to share it with me or like read it out loud. This is very personal stuff. I'm not going to ask you to be like, oh, and then when I was 5, like you don't have to talk about that. It's just for you. If you want at the end, you could take a picture of it just so you don't lose it. But I hope more than anything that you get some value out of this, because it's been 20 years in the making, public speaking in Korea, like all kinds of crazy stuff. This is a reduced like Reader's Digest version of some intensive work that I've done with clients. Working on reality architecture first, how we build our reality and what we're building it around. Secondly, the story of self that we follow, our blueprint, right? What you are building is the first thing. Why you are building what you are building is the second thing. And the third thing is what I call like gratitude hacking, or like finding a way to reframe our existence in a way to feel ridiculously good about ourselves all of the time. So that's a skill set that I teach as well, and I really enjoy that. So the first thing I'd like to do is get a volunteer to come up here. Oh, first hand up. A round of applause for... see you again. So stand on my right side, right over here really quick, okay?
Yep.
I'm going to do this a little bit differently this time. So I want everybody to just take their pen and write down 3 answers to the question I'm going to ask, okay? 3 ideas that you have. Your first name again?
Tim.
Tim is on my right side. I want to get Tim on my left side. So think creatively. How can I get Tim on my left side? Okay, take about 20, 30 seconds. So I wanted to have everybody write them down first because answers change when you start hearing other people's answers. So raise your hand if your answer was violate his sovereignty and physically move him to my left side. Okay? Okay, awesome. That's typically the first answer, is just physically grab him. I'm a large person, and move him over to my left side. Put him where I want him to go, right? So who put ask him to move? Bribe him to move, offer him $1, anything to get him onto my left side. Okay, that's all under the umbrella of communication, right? So this is a solution structure that we have to a problem. Who said, walk around him and stand on the other side? Brilliant, right? Doesn't involve him at all. Little bit, a lot of effort for me. So that would be called like relocate myself, move myself away from the problem, reorient myself to it. Who said this? One, two, three. That's typical. There aren't a lot of people that think in that way. It's similar to moving myself, but it takes less effort. I don't have to quit my job and get another one. I don't have to find a new partner, right? I can just stay right where I am and change my mindset. So thanks, Tim.
Awesome.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
So I want to tell a story about a couple of people here know that I had a severe gambling addiction when I lived abroad in Korea. I want to tell that story in 3 different segments today, pairing it with each individual focus. The focus for this section is reality creation. So in 2011, I tore my LCL at an ADCC finals, interweight finals in Shanghai, China. And I lost that match, but I finished it. I just didn't know the rules well enough to win. But I felt my LCL snap, and I pulled the guy on top of me to get out of it, and then kicked out of it, and spent the rest of the match being on top, doing well, but I didn't know the rules well enough to win. So I ended up losing, didn't get a ticket to Abu Dhabi. Haunts me to this day. But I'm actually glad, because I would have had a torn LCL, so it wouldn't have mattered. But when I got back to Korea, I fell into a little bit of a depression because I couldn't train. For those of you who do train a martial art or go to the gym every day, you know that there's a strong correlation between running, between doing that and your sanity. So I started going out with my friends at this casino. Got super into it. And it ended up being something I thought about way too much and looked forward to way too much. So I went all the time, every chance I got, and I ended up losing a bunch of money. It was a long-term process. And I realized after the fact that what I was doing is I was sabotaging my own finances. So for the first time in my life, I had more money than I needed. I was working 2 jobs as an English teacher, and I didn't really know how to do that. I didn't know how to be that person. So I was stuck in this weird place where I was like, I have money. This isn't a part of my identity. So I actually sabotaged myself, my own finances, back down to my baseline, what I believed I deserved. I deserved to struggle. I deserved to be just okay. I deserved to work super hard and not go anywhere. And that was what I believed. That was a core idea of mine. So in terms of our reality architecture that we're building, it manifests in really interesting ways. Another way you can think about it is that you are exactly where you have decided to be. So if, for instance, this is actually an answer to the question, why are they with him? Or why can't they, whatever in their life? It's because that's where they think they belong. So I don't know if you guys have heard the saying, and it's true of the lottery winners too, right? People win $1 million. Where are they 2 years later? Right back to where they were. Sometimes worse, because they didn't shift anything in their reality of what they were building. They just got leveled way up and have no software for dealing with that. So if they think they belong just above the poverty line and you put them as a millionaire, they're going to, through their choices, they might not believe that they're choosing it. Like, this keeps happening to me, but they're going to find a way to get back down, right? It also happens a lot with people who get surgeries for weight loss, or if they have a person come into their life who treats them really well. If you believe that you deserve to be abused and denigrated and talked badly to, and all of a sudden somebody comes in the picture and they're like, I love you and you're amazing. You're going to be like, yeah. Like, I need to go back over here to like what's familiar. I'm going to go find what I know. I'm going to recreate that for myself. So maybe it involves sabotaging a good thing, or maybe it involves avoiding a good thing, right? Conversely, if you believe, like if you took all of Bill Gates' money tomorrow, took all of his money, how long do you think it would be before that man was a millionaire again? A couple weeks, tops. He's not a millionaire because it happened to him. He's a millionaire because of choices he makes. And now, because that's where he exists, it's sort of seeped into and saturated his identity. He doesn't belong anywhere else. I'm sorry, this doesn't fit, right? I am a millionaire. That's his identity. I'm actually billionaire, but he would start with millions. So it's interesting to see this play out as well. As a personal trainer and as somebody who deals with victims of trauma, I teach women's self-defense for charity events. That's what it's my blows my mind with, feeds my soul. I go around and teach for 2 hours. I'll drive to a city or whatever, teach for 2 hours, women's self-defense, and anybody that comes, they just donate whatever money they want to, and all that money gets donated to charity, like a local women's abuse rape crisis center, or like a Haven or domestic violence shelter. It is the most selfish thing I do because I feel so good when I do it. And I don't have, nobody twists my arm. I'm like, do I get to feel that good again? Okay, cool. And I run to those events because it feeds me in such a unique way. And that's another way of hacking. The biggest secret about volunteering in community service is actually that it's for you. you get to feel the best. And once you tie into that, it just changes your whole perspective. So that's going to kind of finish out the first section for me in terms of reality architecture, and we are creating the world that we live in. Does anybody have any questions about that? Comments? Okay. The second part that I want to talk about is I'm going to start with a story again. I'm not going to tell you their name, but I hear a lot of self-talk in what I do because I'm working with, there's a different kind of person that emerges when somebody's physically exhausted. There's a version of you that you can create on a leather couch that you can't control as well when you're physically exhausted. So a lot of my clients will have emotional breakdown at a certain point. Not all of them, of course, but some of them. Some of them will be punching something and they'll start to cry. Some of them will be doing push-ups to exhaustion and they'll just say something like, God, I'm such a piece of blank, right? And you're just like, what? What'd you just say? You believe that about yourself? And it just leaks out. So you get to have these really interesting conversations with people about parts of their identity that they normally conceal or that they don't disclose. So one of my clients one time told me an especially powerful version of this. And before I progress on, I want to have you guys do one thing. We're going to do 3 different categories. So I want you to write down on a piece of paper, number 1, number 2, number 3. Leave about 3 lines of space in between. By the first one, I want you to write finances. By the second one, I want you to write fitness or health, fitness/health. And by the third one, I want you to write relationship. And what I want you to do is take 3 minutes, 1 minute for each number, okay? And I want you to write down a toxic pattern or limiting belief that you have about that category of your life. That's going to stay in category 1. So as we move into the second part, which is the origins of self, we all have, just like we have this idea about what we believe we deserve, what I always say to my clients is most of us are very large 3 to 7-year-olds. Because between the ages of 3 and 7 is when we learn our coping skills for reality, right? Maybe we were the kid on the playground that got picked on, and we learned that we could be safe by crying, and then that skill gets moved into, just like salespeople, right? It's hard to retrain them because they know what worked before, right? So we have these strategies for coping with a very broken world where we feel a lot of pain and stuff like that. And so what I find is most of the people that I know are still operating the same set of coping mechanisms that cause them to be successful or cause them to be safe or avoid suffering as children. And we learn those at a very young age. So the person that learned that they could get away from a beating by being funny becomes funnier. The person that learns that they can get respect and safety on the playground by being strong and intimidating their peers becomes stronger and more intimidating. When I see really just way too muscular guys at bars, in my heart, I'm just like, oh, buddy, like he learned to be safe. That this is how he gets safe, and we all do that. It's a completely natural process. The hard part is realizing where those strategies came from, and where that relationship to ourself in that way comes from. So I'm going to tell you a story about a client that I have. I will not say her name because she might watch this someday. But she said something to me, again, we're back to that self-talk, right? She said something to me in a training session. She said, and it was like the third time I'd heard her say it, "I'm not athletic." And I was like, once I hear something 3 times, it's part of your story. Right? If I hear somebody say it again on Tuesday and say it again 2 weeks later, it's in there. Like, I know that's something that you hear in your head 1,000 times a day, because I only hear it once for every 100 times they say it. So she said to me, "I'm not athletic." She was boxing. We were doing boxing, and she was like, "I'm just not athletic." And I was like, "Where'd you get that? Where'd you get that? Where'd you get that story?" And she said to me, "When I was 9 years old, my mom dragged me onto a softball pitch because I begged her and begged her and begged her to let me play. In front of all the girls, the whole team, she said, 'This is my daughter. She's really not athletic, but I would appreciate it if you would just take her on the team and kind of just let her play.'" My friend, my client, breaks down in tears, and her mom says, "See," and drags her off the pitch, throws her in the van, and takes her home. Where'd you get that? When you hear that self-talk, when you hear that person expressing a really sacred, deeply internalized part of their narrative, the next question is, where'd you get that? The opposite is true, right? "I'm awesome." Where'd you get that, right? Usually, it's from a parent or a really supportive role model or a coach, teacher, somebody in your life that gave you that part of your story. But we'll get more into that later. What I want you to do now is, based on those 3 things you wrote, those 3 ideas, those 3 words or phrases or sentences, I want you to ask the question, where did I get that? So think about those 3 categories and those 3 ideas that you wrote down that I will never know, and just ask yourself the question, where did I get that? If you don't know, that's okay. Just put a question mark, circle back to it later. Take about 3 minutes again, just think about it. This is something you can circle back to in your life. So now I want to tell you the second part of that story, because of my gambling addiction. I realized through a lot of audio recordings and walks home from the casino totally despairing and just frustrated and full of shame, that I learned what I was basing that blueprint of, why I was sabotaging my finances back down. I internalized from my dad, who is my hero. My dad's an amazing man. He shoveled glass at a factory, trucker, worked in IT, Navy veteran, the hardest worker I've ever met in my life. and someone who taught me about work ethic. So I don't mean this to denigrate him at all. But I realized that I was sabotaging my finances back down to like the level of struggle and barely survive, because that's all I'd ever seen. I shopped at thrift stores when I was growing up as a little kid. For me to have $100 for school clothes was like, I was not raised wealthy, and I had no model for that. So the actual driver for me to sabotage my finances was because I didn't know it at the time, but it was a core part of my identity to be poor. I'm poor. I struggle. I'm poor. I'm desperate. I'm poor. I don't have money. I'm barely making it. See how hard of a worker I am, right? And that was part of my identity. And so because of that, yeah, I had thousands more dollars than I needed. And I might as well have been burning them to get rid of them fast enough so that they didn't threaten my identity anymore. So something really good had happened to me, and I was throwing it away because I didn't know what to do with it. And it was causing friction, right, against my idea. My reality was like causing friction and just driving against what I believed. And so I had to sabotage my reality to get it back down to that smooth level where it coincided with, right, what I believed in my mind. So I want to do 2 exercises right now, and I want to use 2 graphs. The first graph I'm going to ask you to imagine after I show you this one, and the 2 examples we're going to do with a volunteer again. Time for the slide. You guys ready? My only visual aid. Ta-da. This is something that I made for a Toastmasters International Conference in Busan, Korea, where I lived for 4 years. This is how I think about what happens to us. Because for me, gratitude is a super, super important thing. There's 4 different quadrants here. And I'm going to talk about this one, right? Because this is where we spend most of our time. You could think of these as like this axis represents the presence of a thing in our life or the absence of a thing in our life. And then gratitude for something in our life versus misery for something in our life. So this part I would like you guys to kind of just shout out if you've experienced this. So death of a loved one.
Customers not being in the store. No.
Right. No lack of opportunities. Yeah. How about over here? Gratitude due to the presence of a thing. Family. Awesome. Have a house. Food, right? Those are easy. When we think of gratitude, we think of the presence of a good thing, right? This one. Q4. Quadrant 4. Gratitude due to absence. That.
Got rid of a toxic person in your life?
Right. No nuclear war, right? How many people walked out of their house this morning and did a jump for joy because you didn't have a flat tire? How many of you would have had a terrible day if you did have a flat tire? Right? So this jacks me up because if there's an absence of something, if there's an absence of all 4 tires, we're terrible, right? We're miserable. But it doesn't go the other way. It's a one-way street to misery. Everybody check your phones.
Do not disturb, but that was ring sent.
Oh, no, I actually just meant like that's a great opportunity for people to make sure that their phones are not also on. That happens to me all the time. I actually shut my phone off sometimes. So this is super powerful for me, and when I realized that there was this X and Y axis, it blew my mind because I started to see it everywhere I looked. You know, I started to see how there's this infinite well of opportunities for feeling amazing if we just tap into what, like, this infinite thing, but how bad things could be. So last thing I want you to write down I want you to write down the worst imaginable news you could receive in a phone call right now. Huh? The worst imaginable news you could hear in a phone call. Don't write it down. It's fine. If you believe that writing it down will, it's okay. I have kids too. You don't even need to write it. If you have kids, don't even bother. Okay. But the worst imaginable news you could get in a phone call, and then I want you to write down how much money you would pay to not get that phone call, to not have that news happen. Write that number down. All right. I want you guys to just throw. We're not going to speak it into existence. Just throw out some numbers at me. All of the money. Right. However much I can borrow, right? Millions. Okay? Anybody hit $1 million? Yeah? Okay. So this is the part where you flip it and it blows your mind, because it did for me when I realized it. What you've just said is that you would pay that amount of money to be here now. But we don't feel that until it happens. There is a way, without changing anything in your life, for you to feel absolutely amazing all the time, just by realizing that your life is not an entitlement. It is a blessing, and everything in it that happens is a gift. Right? That's it. So there's another scale I want you to imagine. I'm going to shut this off. I want you to imagine expectations over here and gratitude over here. It's a sliding scale. The more you feel, like the higher your expectation, like we don't feel gratitude for something we expect. How many people expected a pulse this morning? Everyone. We expected it on such a deep level that we didn't even think about it once today until I just said the word pulse. Unless you smoke, you don't think about your breath either, right? How much would you give at the end of your life for one more breath of oxygen? One more opportunity to pay attention to what it feels like for those capillaries to suck the oxygen out of the room. But it just goes by. So the other way that I would frame this is that by dialing back your expectations, you can increase the amount of gratitude you will feel for the mundane. So if you feel entitled, or you expect for your kids to be healthy, then you don't experience as much gratitude for that. If you expect your car to work in the morning, if you expect all your tires to be inflated, if you expect yourself to have a job, if you expect your partner not to cheat, right, then you don't feel grateful for any of those things. They just go by. They go by. So by dialing back those expectations and by dialing back those entitlements, you increase the opportunity for gratitude that you have. And you spend more time in quadrant 4. You spend more time thinking about how bad things could be and how grateful would I be for it not to be that way, right? Every day we come into work. Every day we spend time with our customers and our coworkers. That's a huge gift. You know, for me, that just absolutely blows my mind. So I'd like to do one more exercise with a volunteer, if anybody wants to volunteer. Killian, so I'm going to give you $1.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so I want you to tell me, and I'm just going to flip this open one more time, in case you want to reference it. It's like burned into my mind. I want you to tell me why you would be in quadrant 1 with this.
Somebody could perceive that it's only $1 and not like a $20 bill.
Right, okay. Yeah, it's only $1, right? You could frame it the same way by saying it's not a 20, right? Or you could say it's torn up here. It's a little bit torn. my dollar is a little torn, okay? There's the presence of these tears in my dollar. It could be better. How about quadrants 2 and 4?
Gracious that you gave me money, or
Yeah, thank you for this dollar.
yeah, thank you for the dollar.
Yeah, which is exactly what you said, by the way. Congratulations.
Gratitude due to the absence of me not having a dollar.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not nothing,
Yeah,
right?
it's something.
Yeah. Thank you. Great job, Jillian.
Thank you. Good to see you again.
You too, man. So the way that I look at my mind now is I kind of think of my brain, like my mind, like my perceptions as this filter that ultimate reality is passing through. I call my mind a lens a lot. I use the word lens because I feel like you could put two people in the same situation and have the same thing happen to them, and they're going to have wildly different subjective perceptions of that experience just based on what lens that light, that experience is passing through before it hits you. So the shape of your mind, right, the way that we think about the world, the way that we think about ourselves, our identity, all of that, is tied to, is actually the reason that we feel the way we feel about our life. I'm not going to ask, but however you feel about your life is how you have decided to feel about your life. And it's really interesting because I think a lot of people, I talk to my clients a lot about self-love and self-acceptance. A couple really important points about it. Self-love is not earned. You don't earn it. You don't get it at a certain degree or income level or fitness level, and then all of a sudden, now I will have self-love. I know millionaires that are miserable. I know bodybuilders that are miserable. I know people in stable relationships that are miserable. So all these things that we kind of hold out in front of ourselves and say, when I blank, I will feel blank. That's a form of extortion. And I think that a lot of people feel like if they let themselves have the carrot, right? If you just let yourself feel good about your life, you'll lose your motivation. I hear that all the time. But if I just like myself and have fun and everything's good, then why will I work hard? And I think there's a deep fear that if we just allow ourselves to experience self-love and self-acceptance and happiness in this moment unconditionally, that we'll just lose our drive. That's not the case. Only if you're working to avoid punishment, right? But if you're working towards something positive because you love yourself and because you deserve it, that's a totally different experience. So in terms of our motivation and our drive, yes, if you're one of those people who has internalized that idea, right, that you're running away from something bad instead of running towards something good, then that can be problematic because now you're not running away from poverty, you're running towards wealth, right? So in terms of what you're moving towards, I would encourage you guys to do more work, more thinking about loving yourself exactly where you are and loving your life exactly as it is. Because your life is beautiful. You're here. Everything's wonderful and amazing. Because everybody in this room can think of one thing where if you took it away and you had one real problem, all of a sudden all the fake problems, all the little things would just evaporate. It wouldn't matter at all. And that's how you can tell a real problem from a fake problem. Because one real problem destroys and makes invisible all the fake problems. But for me, it's super important to get to that place of self-acceptance and self-love and do that work internally. Because then, you're leading, you're selling, you're doing all the things in this company. You're doing all these things from a place of abundance, not from a place of scarcity. Does that make sense? So in terms of shifting narrative, that's huge for me. I want to ask you guys a question. What's the difference between starving and fasting? What's the difference between starving and fasting?
The decision to do so.
The decision, exactly. Choice. The difference between starving and fasting is just choice. When I was getting out of the throes of my addiction, I ended up realizing that I had already suffered. Like when I was a cage fighter, I had a fight. My last fight, I realized that it hurt just as much to lose as it did to win. Like I was going to get hit anyway, so I might as well just win. And then I did, because I'd gotten past the hang up of like, okay, I'm going to do this. It's just as hard to win as it is to lose. I might as well just win. And I realized that one of my favorite quotes is, everyone suffers, not everyone learns. So when I look at my time there and my experience going through that, I realized that if I chose not to learn from my addiction, if I chose not to learn from that process, then it was just a tax. And all that money was just lost. So let's say it was $25,000, $35,000. It's just gone, right? That money is just out. But it's the moment that I choose to learn from my process, the moment that I choose to learn from all that suffering, it ceases to be a tax and it becomes tuition. So that money, instead of just being lost, becomes an investment. And so I was able to turn my loss into a lesson. I was able to turn it into an investment and tuition for my own personal growth. So the way I look at my process now and reframing that part of my life, I look at it as a master's degree in addiction studies. I have a lot of friends who paid a lot more for a lot less. I now have the empathy. When an addict talks to me, I can say, I understand what it's like to have your autonomy subverted. I understand what it's like to lose control of your process. I understand that addiction is a process. And I understand that it's ongoing. You know, it's never safe for an alcoholic to go have a beer, right? It's never safe for somebody who's been addicted to cigarettes and wants to stop smoking to just have one. So I got all of that out of that experience, and I'm super grateful for that. The way that I look at my mouth now is that I'm already breathing. So every time I exhale, it's an opportunity to express gratitude. And every time I choose not to do that, I deprive the world of my thanks. I used to say, there is the only prayer that I can think worth actually saying is thank you. It's so easy to exhale that gratitude into the world. I look at my mouth now, my hands, they're just a gratitude factory. And production is free. It doesn't cost anything to say thank you to somebody. To the person, putting popcorn in a bucket at the movies. Hey, thank you so much. I really appreciate what you're doing. So I'm going to recite a poem for you by Edmund Vance Cook. It's called How Did You Die? I think about death a lot because it makes me conscious of its inevitability, and it makes me work harder. It makes me a better dad. It makes me a better teammate to realize that I will not always have infinite opportunities to do what I want with my life. It's not a form of desperation. It's just a form of appreciation. I heard this poem for the first time when I was in Alaska. I was sitting on a bearskin rug, and the guy who recited it for me was on a petrified mammoth skull, so it kind of stuck with me. It was written in the 1800s. It's called How Did You Die? Did you tackle that trouble that came your way with a resolute heart and cheerful, or hide your face from the light of day with a craven soul and fearful? Oh, a trouble's a ton, or a trouble's an ounce, or a trouble's what you make it. It's not the fact that you're hurt that counts, only how did you take it? You're beaten to earth, well, what's that? Come up with a smiling face. It's nothing against you to fall down flat, but to lie there, that's disgrace. The harder you're thrown, the higher you bounce. Be proud of your blackened eye. It's not the fact that you're licked that counts, but how did you fight and why? And though you be done to the death, what then? If you battled the best you could. If you played your part in the world of men, the critical call it good. Death comes with a crawl or it comes with a pounce, but whether it's slow or spry, it's not the fact that you're dead that counts, only how did you die?